Hey everybody, today I am doing another topic video. This one is television shows. What are your favorite TV shows and why? I've gotten so many questions over the years about TV shows and my favorite TV shows, so I figured I would just kind of combine this, react to some of you guys' favorites, which are also my own. I'm only doing a few. I promise I'll do more at some point. I'll do a second part to this, maybe a third part, because there are so many TV shows, but I figured I'd just cover kind of a handful of the basics here. First one is my favorite show overall would have to be The Sopranos. From the moment the opening credits for The Sopranos started rolling, I knew I was watching something unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I liked it, but I was only catching the parts that appealed to me as a 10-year-old, like the violence and the TNA at the bada bing. I decided to rewatch the first season with a TV watching palette that had since matured, so I could recognize if The Sopranos was indeed the good stuff, rather than just being overhyped like some people would describe the show. Decades later, the first season of The Sopranos not only holds up, but it has aged so well, for God's sakes. Very glad I decided to rewatch it and truly appreciate it for the substance, and not just being an enthralled 10-year-old. That is crazy that you watched that show at 10 years old. I cannot imagine watching that show at age 10. I didn't see it until I was in college or something like that. But yes, I agree with you. The Sopranos is my favorite television show of all time. It's not even a contest for me, really. There are so many things I could say about it. It needs to be an entire topic video on its own, quite frankly. But yeah, I mean, I could be that person who was like, it was groundbreaking, and without this show, there would never be a Breaking Bad or a Mad Men or a Dexter or any of those kind of anti-hero type shows, and that's absolutely true. But I also think, you know, when it comes to mob stories in American film in particular, they've been around for so long, and there's so many great ones, you know, starting back from like the 1930s with the Cagney films and the Bogart and the Eddie G. Robinson stuff, which is fantastic. Then you go to The Godfather and you know, Scorsese with more of the like Goodfellas and stuff like that. And yet this show is completely different from all of that, because those, as amazing as they are, they do kind of fall into the trap of also being, you know, glamorized. There is something romantic and very Shakespearean about, you know, the nature of those particular films. And The Sopranos does not do that. The Sopranos is not glamorous at all. It's quite ugly and gray. Yes, cinematic to a sense, but, you know, it's kind of more deconstructing the whole idea of that glamorization of mob stories, but through the classical filter, ironically. It says so much about the time period in which it takes place. You know, you're having like the protagonist, this boomer who has all this money, but it's not like he was an Italian immigrant like his grandparents at the turn of the century. You know, he wasn't uneducated like his parents. He has all this wealth and all this stuff, and he feels maybe a little bit of guilt for it, yet he feels emasculated because he's going to a therapist and expressing his feelings. So it's that weird feeling, that kind of the boomer, the millennials, the feeling of, you know, you have everything you could want. You have the excess, and that primal kind of masculine urge that we all have to be protective, to be dominant, to be survivors is no longer necessary. It's about that internal struggle. It's not about necessarily the more grand moments of the action. It's more about the in-between. It's about family. And I find the fact that it focuses more on the characters more interesting from a psychological perspective than had it been more kind of plot-driven. The characters are some of the best I think that have ever been written. I mean, honestly, this is the kind of show when it's over, it's hardest to sever the ties with these characters because you want to keep following them, because they are just so like three-dimensional in your life. It's nuanced, it's very, very funny, one of the funniest shows ever, but also one of the most dark and deeply painful, not afraid to go to really dark questions and dark areas of the soul and what we grapple with as human beings. It also delves into dreams, the psychology of dreams, and how that relates to entertainment, how that relates to death and the waking life. Some of the best dream sequences you'll ever see. It's honestly, it's like on the level of like Louis Spinwell or something like that. And it forces a lot of the characters to explore some of the really vulnerable parts of them, some of the Freudian feelings, the nature of their feelings, or just the Freudian nature of human behavior. Some people argue that the whole show is a dream, and honestly, that has crossed my mind before, especially when you watch the final scene of the show, just because it is so similar to some of the dream sequences. A lot of the dream sequences run into real life where you can't tell what is real and what is not. But as far as the ending goes, I know there's a lot of controversy about it. It is probably the most controversial ending of all time. It's genius. I don't care what anybody says. I really think it is the greatest ending to a television show. I don't think there'll ever be an ending that great. And if you don't like it or don't understand it, I urge you to rewatch the show. This is a show that depends on multiple viewings for you to really understand how brilliant it is, I think. When I watched the ending of the show with one of my friends, he said it was the best review for it. He said, the ending is so brilliant because it expresses just how meaningful life can be, but at the same time, just how meaningless it is. And that is so right. It's so brutal in a sense, but also very impactful. Twin Peaks, it's one of the most unique shows ever made. Its odd combination of melodrama, surrealism, and mystery is one that has yet to be replicated in any medium, in my opinion. I can watch it over and over again and never stop loving it. Yes, so Twin Peaks, I have a weird relationship with that show. I've seen so many episodes, multiple times, of season 1, yet I've never seen the whole season. I've never seen the whole season of season 2, and I've never seen the whole season of Twin Peaks: The Return. So it's like I have kind of a weird, kind of fractured point of view on just the whole show's narrative, just looking back on it. But yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, the reason I never really finished it is because I always felt that it started to kind of go off the rails and lose a little bit of focus, and I struggled to maintain interest. But that being said, I do agree. I think it is one of the most clever shows ever made, and one of the most groundbreaking because it was so cinematic. Because I mean, you take somebody like David Lynch, who has such a strong point of view and has made so many great cinematic auteur pieces in his films, like with his films, he's going to do the same for television. And it's everything that we know and love from Lynch, you know, kind of deconstructing what is typical entertainment. You know, everything looks like it's all happy and quaint, like Blue Velvet, like a 1950s kind of doo-wop kind of setting, and then you realize, no, there's this really dark, terrible murder mystery underneath, and the more you delve into it, the more complex it gets, the more of this weird labyrinth, and it's kind of to a point where it's kind of sending you down a rabbit hole, and you're kind of ripping open the dimension to explore consciousness in an interesting way. And all of these are things that he does delve into later, especially with Mulholland Drive, and most successfully, in my opinion. But here you're seeing it in a very interesting way. I think it has one of the best pilots of all time. I love how he uses, you know, cast members from like West Side Story, all part of the kind of the surface level kind of quaintness, and then deconstructing it and realizing the ugliness underneath a lot of human behavior. I always think of David Lynch, it's like he's filming an MGM Technicolor movie, and everybody's smiling and dancing, and he's like, no, smile more, be bigger, be happier. And they're just, you know, smiling. He's like, no, more. And it gets to a point where they snap and they go insane and they start stabbing each other, and the blood looks beautiful in that Technicolor. That's how I see David. Cowboy Bebop. Having trouble trying to pin down specifically why. There's just so much. The music, the animation, the characters. One of those pieces of media that makes me feel like I went on a grand adventure with a wide range of emotions. Yes. Okay, the Cowboy Bebop is one of my all-time favorite shows as well. And I actually totally get what you're saying here when you say you have trouble pinning down specifically why you like it. Because I had that same problem for a very long time. I knew I was really attracted to the aesthetic, like most people. Aesthetically, it's one of the most extraordinary television shows ever. I mean, especially for, you know, anime television shows. I think it's one of the most beautifully drawn. It's very Western influenced, obviously, the aesthetic, and so it's pulling from a lot of genres, you know, staples and like American culture, and it's kind of a pastiche of all of that, but in a lot of ways it's doing it better. It's using like blaxploitation and film noir and spaghetti westerns. But yeah, when you watch the show, there's very little connective tissue. There's only about, I think, 5 episodes that connect the whole like arc of the narrative of the show, and the rest of them are just kind of small, incidental, episodic things that don't really have to do with the rest of the show. But yet, when you go back and watch the show, you realize, even if it may not be in a literal sense, so much metaphorically is contributing to that overall arc. And that's another reason why it's a show that demands a second viewing, and you realize just how brilliant it is on the second. The music, of course, as you say, is incredible. I love, it's pulling from all kinds of different musical genres as well. Of course, jazz being the big staple, which fits the characters because, you know, they're just, you know, like a bunch of people living paycheck to paycheck. They're kind of, have a very bohemian lifestyle, very chill, and they're kind of over it all. And their whole motto is whatever happens, happens. And that kind of fits the kind of improvisational, cool jazzy feel. But I think thematically it really resonates. Yes, it's beautiful to look at, but there's so much more to it. The show is about all kinds of things. It's about memory and how that can be distorted and how it kind of changes the way you live your life as you get older in a darker sense. It changes the way you perceive the world, and it changes the things that you want. It's about loneliness. It's about being hopelessly aimless, yet striving for some sort of love, some sort of meaning. It's about confronting your own mortality. So yeah, I think it's a really, really extraordinary show. And if you haven't seen it, oh my goodness, you've got to watch it. It's only like 26 episodes. Mad Men, rich, complex, culturally and emotionally connective, and as consistently compelling as great literature. Totally agree. Matthew Weiner directed and wrote that show. And he also wrote for The Sopranos. He was a head writer only on the last 2 seasons, I believe, so season 5 and 6. And he has talked so much about how David Chase, the writer of The Sopranos, inspired him to make Mad Men, and how if it hadn't been for The Sopranos, that Mad Men would never have succeeded. And I totally get what he's saying, because Mad Men thematically is so close to The Sopranos. Really, when you watch them side by side, it's almost as if, not quite, but it's almost as if they take place in the same universe. It's just that one takes place in the 1960s, one is in the present day for the time, and they're, completely different scenarios and different people. But yeah, it is one of the darker shows. It's more about character and kind of complex character motivation rather than plot. Again, why I gravitate towards that. It does have some of the greatest characters ever written in television. It has some of the best writing, and it deals with a lot of really, really dark themes that The Sopranos deals with in spades. Confronting your own mortality, fear of losing everything that means anything to you. It's about a bunch of characters who are looking for happiness, but they're doing it all in the wrong ways. They're looking for happiness through this kind of these fleeting desires that don't mean anything. Hence the kind of metaphor for being an advertising agency that they work for. It used to be my favorite show until I saw The Sopranos. To me, The Sopranos just takes all of those ideas and fleshes them out even more, is more ambitious with them. The characters are better written overall. But that being said, if you like The Sopranos, then you would love Mad Men, I really think. Breaking Bad, great acting, great ending, no bad seasons, and only one bad episode, The Fly, on the entire run of the show. Okay, well, I'll get back to that, but I agree with the first part that you said. Yeah, I think that's what makes it so good. Breaking Bad, yes, that of course, that show I binged harder than I've ever binged anything in my life. Just because it is so visceral, it's so immediate, it's so plot driven, it's so beat for beat for beat, and you can't stop watching it. It makes sense why it's so powerful. But yes, it is very well done. I think of all the shows I've seen, even though I prefer shows that are more complex in terms of character and thematically, like The Sopranos or Mad Men, I think that Breaking Bad, what it does better than those shows is it's more consistent. I have issues here and there with Sopranos and Mad Men, but with Breaking Bad, I think it's the most fully realized. As you say, there's like no bad episodes. It works so well, and there's so little fat to trim. It's remarkable, honestly. Rarely do you ever see anything that well structured. It's amazing, and yes, it is. It has a very distinct style. It's very Tarantino influenced. It's very Sopranos influenced. An examination of capitalism and relationships. It has everything that you could want and everything that we all relate to. And it's one of the most emotionally resonant shows as well. And it is, yes, one of my favorite shows. I will say it doesn't hold up as well on repeated viewings as something like The Sopranos. I think just because the characters just aren't as rich, not as delved into. I mean, I look at Skylar and Walt, and they're amazing, but the relationship between Carmela and Tony to me is much more complex. And there's more to delve into, again, on repeated viewings with something like that. But yes, I mean, just in terms of great television, it's very hard to beat something like Breaking Bad. But yeah, those are just a handful of shows. Again, I'll talk about more. I'm missing so many, and you guys had a lot of good answers, but we'll do it again. But anyway, that's the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Over here, you will see my Patreon supporters. If you would like to support, the link for that is below. All my social media and everything is below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.